Hi. How's it going? Yeah? You guys are a little bit low-key. Yeah. Now that's a podcast audience. All right, cool. Welcome to the Green Space. I'm Jennifer. I work here. How'd you hear about the show? Alexis. Oh, that's incredibly specific. Cool. Well, great. Well, thanks. I'm glad you're here. Did you tell other people too?
Yes.
Wow. Holy smokes. Can you come back tomorrow? Thank you. I'm going to get your email. How many of you are here for the first time ever? Oh, wow. Nice. What have you been doing all these years? Well, I hope it won't be the last time. Let's see how it goes. Kidding. Well, the Green Space is a place where we bring people together to have conversations, play music, make art, make podcasts, radio shows, and then we beam them on out of here with the hope of just, changing the world or something like that. We do it on the radio. We do it digitally. We do it on Facebook. So this is being streamed on Facebook. So if you like what you see in here tonight, you can look it up later. Check it out. It'll be there. Did you guys get a cocktail? Did anyone get a cocktail? This is also the only place in the world where you can get a Brian Lehrer-themed alcoholic beverage. So it's incredibly special. I hope you try it, because your drink purchases do count as supporting independent public media. So that's for real, for real. We're listener-supported public radio here. Are any of you members of WNYC or WQXR? Okay, nice. Yeah. All right, New York Times subscribers? Okay, both? Like, what's the crossover? Oh, wow, it's pretty significant. Okay, I mean, that's predictable. I don't know why I'm surprised. Well, anyway, thank you for supporting us and this event. Also want to thank the Jerome L. Green Foundation and Samantha and everyone on the New York Times team for bringing their podcast club here, because it's a really great event. We do about 10 events here every month. Every Monday night, it is podcast tapings or podcast-adjacent activities like this one. The next two shows are sold out. It's Generation Women and Thirst Aid Kit coming up in March. And then some WNYC Studios colleagues will be here, so stay tuned for those. Tomorrow night, we're starting a series with Echoing Green, having social justice entrepreneurs come in and tell us how to make change happen now. That's hosted by Jamie Floyd. Every first Friday, we activate this disco ball above your heads. We have a variety show, so that's coming up on Friday. It's really a lot of fun. It's when you get to find out if nudity and public radio mix. They do. Occasionally, not in a bad way. Is it too soon? I'm sorry, I shouldn't make that joke. I take it all back. I take it all back. This is performance art in this show, I trust. I'm backing up. We also do classical music, you guys. WQXR. Just sign up for our newsletter. I'm going to get out of here now. Before we start, though, do silence your phones if you haven't already. You can leave them on. If you want to really subtly tweet, that is okay. But yeah, I really am going to get out of here. Before I say anything else, turn it over to the Senior Manager for Events Marketing at the New York Times, Beth Weinstein.
Hi, everybody. My name's Beth Weinstein. I develop events for subscribers at the New York Times. Our programming aims to show you the stories behind the stories, show you about our journalist process. We also strive to create a dialogue between you and our journalists, and we try to bring all the amazing stuff that's happening in the building outside. So we've brought subscribers to Citi Field for a tour of Citi Field with Tyler Kepner, followed by a game. We brought subscribers to The Daily Show for a talk back after a taping to highlight our fantastic Best of Late Night. We have all kinds of panels and conversations that you're invited to. And we've done things like Dear Evan Hansen tickets with a after show talk back with David Gallis and the cast. So lots of ways to engage with our journalists and all the amazing things that they're up to. And I can't think of a better way to kind of showcase what our subscriber events do than this event series. It happens once a month, every last Monday of the month. And Samantha will tell you, but this started as an inter-office brown bag lunch. It became a closed Facebook group, and now it's an event series. So we're so happy that you're all here. I hope you'll come back next month. And Samantha Henning, our editorial director, will be out in a minute. Thank you.
you all for coming tonight. So I'll start by just giving a brief overview of what Podcast Club is, and then we'll jump right in. Did you all know that you were supposed to listen to a specific episode before coming? And did everyone do it? All right, that's great. So that's how Podcast Club is basically like a book club, but for podcasts. We choose one episode of one show for each time, and we get together and discuss it. So this should be as interactive and participatory as you guys are willing to let it be. We'll start by chatting a little bit up here, but if you have a comment or a question, put your hand up or try to get my attention, and I'll also be turning to you a lot with questions for you. So we have here Jonathan Goldstein.
Hello. Thank you.
And Wendy Dorr, who's a producer on the show, produced this episode. And Gregor, the title character. Whoa. Before we get into the show at all, I have to know, how do you feel about the fact that Gregor got more applause?
I like it. I feel it's deserved.
Getting
I know
things
my
off on the
place
right
in
foot.
food chain.
So before we get to this episode, can we talk just a little bit about the origins of the show? Where did this idea come from? Where did this idea come from?
I'll let you field this one. No, the idea for the podcast?
Yeah, for the whole thing.
For the whole thing. Well, there was a lot of freedom, which was nice. Alex Bloomberg said that I could just figure out what I wanted to do, and there was all kinds of different ideas that were floated. Like at one point, he had this thought that the show could just be called Goldstein Goes Into Buildings, where I would just be walking down the street and I'd see a building and I'd be like, that seems like a good building to go inside. And I'd go inside with my microphone and knock on doors and just ask what was going on.
Did you pilot that?
We didn't.
Okay.
But then there was an idea. He liked the idea of like me being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to like have that show where people get dropped naked into the forest kind of feel about it. And
I don't know that show. That's a real show?
I think it's called People Drop Naked into the Forest. Or Scared and Naked
Naked
or
and
something.
Afraid.
Naked and Afraid.
Okay.
And then there was an idea of like where I would go to the airport and he would give me an envelope and I would find out where I'm going in the envelope, and but it seemed like the common denominator among the stories that I gravitated towards dealt in some capacity with like the past, deep dives into the past and regret. And so it was once I found the common denominator among all these things, then it seemed simple, but it took a long time to get to that, to this very simple idea. And my wife, Emily, works at This American Life, and when she was talking to Ira Glass, he asked what my thing was going to be about, and she said, it's going to be about regret and that kind of thing. And he said, so it's basically going to be like every story he ever does, which is true.
And so at what point, you're coming up with the show, you're coming up with the title and the music and all of that, at what point does someone say, I know how every show needs to begin. It's with Jonathan calling his friend Jackie and having a conversation that has nothing to do with the rest of the show?
Yeah, that was very last minute.
Oh, really?
Originally, there was a very high concept beginning that was almost, it just became, it was like I was riding the G train at the beginning of every episode, and then I would hear the voice of God through the PA system, the stand clear of the closing door voice, because I have a friend who sounds a lot like that guy. So we would have a conversation, but it just proved to be like producing a whole other podcast. It was so complicated. So then at the last minute, what happened? I just called up Jackie, and she hung up on me, and
you were like, "That's it."
And the
gold.
yeah, and the gold began. Yeah. So.
And you were there, Wendy, when that struck?
we had interviewed Jackie for the Julia episode because there was a thought at one point that it would be funny to have Jackie, who is
because the Julia episode was about bullying.
Yeah.
And Jackie being a bully.
We thought, that
hey, she'll be
somehow-
able to crack this.
but it didn't make it in. Obviously, the tone was off,
Yeah.
but we wanted to figure out a place for Jackie, and I think we just were like, let's just call her,
Yeah.
and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And so by the time the first season was out, you knew at that point that she was going to be in every episode in the first season, right?
Well, there was an issue about her picking up the phone to receive these calls. Like, she really doesn't care. And she doesn't. I tell her how much everyone really loves it, and she just doesn't care because she's hostile and withholding. So, what are you gonna?
Gregor, on the other hand.
I was going to say, because a lot of people ask the question, how much is real and how much is
Yeah.
fake? And I think the question of the Jackie Open is sort of the same as the process, which is there's elements of that that's real interaction, and elements are crafted carefully by Wendy to have narrative beats and turns and all the important things that make it good,
Right.
and Johnny. But I think the
Johnny stays out of the kitchen. That's how he can help
that's
the
the
most.
rule. But there's a question that comes up a lot is like sort of how real it is.
Yeah.
Which I feel like I've seen the question on Larry David on Curb Your Enthusiasm. People who are always asking his castmates, is that really Larry? Is that what he's like? Which I feel like a certain parallel kinship. And I
Well,
feel
your
like,
wife in this episode makes that connection.
does she? I didn't
Yes.
listen, but
You've not listened to any episodes.
I try
right?
never to listen to them.
Is that true?
That
You
is
haven't
true.
listened to this episode?
Did your wife listen?
She listens.
She listens. She gives me a review afterwards.
So you mean you made all these people listen to the episode, but you couldn't even listen to the episode?
I find it's best not to listen. Anyway, I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, people ask what Larry's like, and I think, the element of who that guy is in real life versus the character he plays by the same name on the show
Yeah.
is not the same guy. Obviously, it's been edited and worked over and whatever. But the fundamental comedic frisson,
Frisson.
the exchange that we have, a lot of this is just, it's not quite as simple as, you pick up a phone call and record it and then print it to tape and go to air and it's done. It's more like in between there's 1,000 hours of work happen. But it's still real in that they're really phone calls. They really are. That's all real.
Yeah. Well, I do think that Jonathan as character is a very interesting part of Heavyweight that I want to talk
Jonathan.
We have a clip actually from the first episode.
Can
Can we roll the
Set this one
broad
up for us,
clip?
Johnny. What are we going to hear?
I don't know.
We're riding on Queens Boulevard. Johnny's in the back seat with the Who. He's got his naked ass up in the air, and he's humping. Well, the funny thing is, we had to stop for a light, and there's a truck driver sitting in the cab up high. I looked at the guy. It was funny.
So if you guys missed each other,
What?
do you miss each other?
He asked the weirdest question. What is he, abroad?
No, I don't know. That's,
So there's a lot of this in the show of sort of like bits that you leave in where either you are making fun of yourself or someone else is making fun of you. Is that part of how you think of the Jonathan character within Heavyweight?
Yeah, I like it a lot. But it also inoculates me in a way that allows me to then go to places, because I'm taking my lumps, and then I could sort of go to places that are socially inappropriate, but appropriate, in the context of this thing, which is not the same as like, I don't know, like polite cocktail conversation. So if they beat me up a little bit, then I get to kind of like take my shots, I suppose. That was my, by the way, my dad and his brother Sheldon, my father Buzz and his brother Sheldon, both in their 80s, who hadn't spoken in like 40 years, and that was them like having their first conversation. Yeah.
And so, Gregor, since you haven't listened, you can't weigh in on sort of
Fresh ears on that, but I would say,
We save Gregor for the end, like once the whole season has been mixed and it's been out for a year or so, just for the fresh ears.
Yeah.
but I was thinking, the genius of Alex, I guess, was what he was looking for initially was that we're going to push Johnny into these uncomfortable situations, push him into a building or push him into the forest or whatever
Right.
it was. Obviously, some version of that is what this is, which is push Johnny into the backseat of a car with two guys bickering or with me or whatever. I do think that there's a fundamental truth there that is still being played out, which is what his reaction is to, like someone once said something like, what is wrong with Johnny? Why would he put himself into discomfort intentionally, on purpose, put himself into these uncomfortable situations?
I think you said that.
That was me. I'm quoting myself. But I also think it's, I the way I see it is you're sort of half doing it for the laughs and half for the serious literary blazer guy who you are, which I think is the blazer over sweater guy, which is, there's a very writerly aspect to all that where you're kind of into, I think, telling a story and having deep psychological insight and sensitivity, and all the characters have turns and all that stuff. So I don't think it's all just about the yucks.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wendy, as an impartial observer and creator, I mean, do you think that the Jonathan character is true to Jonathan and the Gregor character is true to Gregor, or what is true?
I mean, I think they're
Let's just go into that.
caricatures. They are, you know, once Jonathan's monologue and it's a caricature.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you become a caricature of yourself also. And we also play up that, you know, your neuroses.
Neuroses.
Ease.
Plural.
And your harshness.
I'm
Truth-telling.
I was told by Johnny, warned by Johnny tonight, not to to tell the truth that I'm
Like
actually
not to
do this and say how wonderful and warm a guy I am. So yeah, it's all
to
don't
do
let
what
the
you're
other
doing
side
right
show.
now.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, I'll say, yeah, it's all true. I mean, it's more or less real.
Well, your mom is here, right, Gregor?
My mom is here.
Where is your mom?
That's why I can't really be myself, because she's watching. Because I will say this, my mom has listened to the show, and when we used to do another show called Wiretap for 11 seasons, like 50 episodes up, she would often call and yell at me and say, like, why do you have such a mean mouth? Where'd you get this mean mouth from? Why are you so mean? And I was like, Ma, it's just, this is a radio show. Because it is extracting, for a constructed purpose, the elements that are maybe funny turns.
Right.
So
do you think when you listen, have you listened to this episode? Do you think that the Gregor who's portrayed in the episode is your son?
I didn't listen to the whole episode,
that's
but
my mom.
I have, if you want my opinion about the reality of it, is that he is a very fine, loving, generous person, and can be, but, here's the but.
It's out there.
He can be a funny grouch, and I have that from my own experience, that he grouches at me, but makes me laugh because he's very grouchy, but also very funny. So I think there's some basis for what he has enacted with Jonathan, his practice on me, if I take that honor.
All right.
Who said the quote, art is the lie that tells the truth? I think that is the fundamental answer to the question.
Yeah. Well, so question for everyone out here. Do you care if the Jonathan is the real Jonathan or the Gregor is the real Gregor?
I mean,
No?
I mean, if we were totally different, it would be disappointing. But if there were, I don't expect that the way he portrays himself and writes things on the radio is going to be exactly. So if he were like this Pollyanna person or something.
you mean if I came out here with like a beautiful head of hair, wearing like a mesh shirt and weightlifter pants?
I mean, they're highly edited versions of themselves. So if you think about writing an email, you're highly editing yourself. So you're creating the best possible version.
What she said.
The funniest version of yourself in the script. So we're just making everybody look good.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, you've been doing this for a long time, putting a version of yourself on the air. Have your choices changed?
Yes.
In what way?
Yeah, well, because if you work with editors who you trust, like Wendy Dorr and like Kalila Holt, who's there in the second row over there, you begin to, because for many years I was editing myself pretty much, and I had like an idea of who my persona was. But then when you have people whose taste you could trust, it's kind of there was one moment we were just talking about where I was interviewing my wife, and in the midst of it, I dropped the tape recorder on the sidewalk.
We have that clip. Should we
let's roll the clip.
Let's roll the clip.
I don't think I've ever been able to make myself quite as vulnerable as I was in that relationship. I just didn't know any better. I had no defenses. I had no game.
Isn't that what love is sort of about? Just being vulnerable in that way?
I want to be vulnerable with you, but I think in some ways... Sorry, I just dropped the recorder. So
It's really amazing timing.
I don't know if I found it so funny, but Wendy thought it was hilarious. And it's like the moment that people remember the most because it shows vulnerability and everything. But it's sort of like to get eyes on you and see you in a different way than you see yourself, then you expand who you can be in front of the, because it's sort of like a veil dance, the how much you show of who you are and, how much you're curating. But like, then when other people are editing you and you can think differently about who you are and you trust that vision of who you are, then it grows and it changes.
Have you two gotten into fights about parts to leave in or cut in terms of creating that character?
I mean, I wouldn't say fights, but I mean, that moment, the dropping of the microphone, I just kept playing it back and back, and it just kept making me laugh. And you're like, what are you laughing at? And I just loved it so much. And I think that you were like, wait, that moment? We're going to use that? Okay, or maybe, all right. And then, so it's always a discussion about, and Kaylee knows this too, about which moments are too much or...
I will say when I arrived in the back, Wendy was sitting there and I heard just like something dropping from within the bathroom, and it was Jonathan. So it's authentic. You truly are dropping things all the time.
Not to brag, but yeah, I guess I am.
Oh yeah, question over there.
I'm wondering how much that persona plays into like the actual moment of recording. So like when you're in a room with Gregor and Moby, like how much are you like actively thinking I'm the interlocutor here, or how much are you letting them kind of work out what they're dealing with?
What do you mean in terms of like throwing myself on the grenade?
Partially that, or partially like how conscious are you of like narrative, like when you're actually there?
Thinking about it a lot. I will say like something that maybe illustrates that, but we can get back to the Gregor and Moby thing. But there was one episode where I couldn't get out of the apartment because all the locks were really confusing to me. Like we had this dramatic, it was a dramatic moment where I was leaving on my mission and then I couldn't get the locks open in this typical Brooklyn apartment with like 50 locks on the door. And as it was happening, I was so happy that it was happening. It was great. I was like, I hope I never get out of this apartment because it was so good. And so it's like you get to embarrass yourself, but like with a higher purpose, because like it's to entertain people. So that's a great safety net. But as far as like shaping I don't know. What do you think? How'd it play out?
I mean, I think that particular moment that I think you're referring to is in Moby's kitchen at that moment of the sort of tense thing and the lemonade and all that stuff.
Yeah, we didn't get any lemonade.
We didn't get any lemonade.
But the way you gave him the lemonade, it sounded like you didn't want any lemonade, to be fair to Moby.
Thirsty as can be. It was a hot day in Hollywood Hills.
Are there any other Moby apologists here?
It did seem like a gift, right?
Well, but you also were like, here's something disgusting.
I think traditionally when you bring lemonade to someone's house,
I agree. His first thought was like, let me give it to you.
Oh, shall I open it? In any case, we can let the lemonade go. I do think the question, which I think is a really a complicated and less funny question to ask, is when you, let's say, when I'm talking to Johnny on the phone, there's usually a person or two listening in, like Wendy or a producer. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, he'll sometimes say what they laughed at or they thought that part was funny. So there's this, piece that I think is going on in real time where you're sort of doing it, but you're also trying to think through where this could go, or sort of, I'm less responsible for that. I kind of get off easy because I can just, hold forth.
Right.
But even in the Moby piece or in the related piece about my dad and the reaction to it, there is a piece to it which is not just two idiots talking to each other on the phone. It's also supposed to cover a certain ground. So like, you're kind of aware of that. I mean, it's got to be done with some sort of get you from A to B. There is a sort of story that you're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. And you feel like you were a part of that. I mean, there's a way where you could see it where your mission, if your mission is truly to confront Moby and get your CDs back, that could be at odds with the mission of telling a great story and having a great narrative arc. But it sounds like you were actually kind of a co-conspirator in the true mission of telling a great story.
I think to belabor the point about dropping his mic when he's talking to his wife to death, we're having a real exchange. We're really trying to, cross the street in LA, and I'm yelling at him. But there's also kind of like doing stand-up or something. In the back of your mind, you're thinking, there are rails, and we have gone off them or we're on them.
But also just like when certain relationships that people have, like we're always kind of riffing anyway. We like funny stuff, and so it's not that big a stretch. But you also have a natural broadcaster's ability.
My baritone, you mean?
That, and just also like just very clear at explaining things, and like you do it in small ways. Like, the moment when you're explaining to me your troubles at the beginning of the story, and you say, it's like that children's game, and I know it's musical chairs, but you get me to say musical chairs, and then you say, yes, musical chairs. So we're like underlining that and accentuating, you know what I mean? And then you just do it naturally. Then also, you make me, I'm not an easy laugh, but you make me laugh, so you make me a better broadcaster too.
Are we going to get the whole sweet turn here? You make me laugh. Oh, Johnny. I think I would also say we just, 3 hours ago, did talk to a class up at Columbia School of Journalism and did a similar kind of panel about this thing. And afterwards, we're on the street, and, you come out of the room and do this sort of unloading on, well, that was it. And I was thinking, Wendy was kind of being a little bit the arbiter, oh, wasn't that? And I was thinking, in a way, you do naturally step into the roles that you're in, where I'm sort of doing the quick hot take, lacerating, hey guys, and she's there to be like, well, wasn't that bad? And Johnny's sort of in between. And I do think that's what I mean by, I don't pretend to be some kind of actor. I think this is more real, but it's not 100% real. I mean, it's real with a lowercase r. I mean, it's real in that you get some laughs and then maybe try and build stuff around that.
Mm-hmm.
I will actually give you a good name-dropping story which just came to me.
Yeah.
These are, and I'm dropping names that probably no one in the room is even going to recognize, but I'll tell you it anyway. A bunch of years ago, just when I was starting to do Wiretap, I did this night with Jeff Garland, Jeff Ross, and Jesse Klein.
Do people recognize the names? Yeah, they recognize the names.
It was a prepared piece, and I was doing it at this place in LA, and there was a moment where I got heckled or something. Someone asked some question, and I had some comeback quickly I wasn't even thinking of, and it was probably the biggest laugh of the night. And I was thinking then, as I often think of when he tells me, after we have a phone call and he says the producers were laughing, it was one of those things where you kind of aren't really thinking about it, it just sort of popped out, and you're not really this will be quite the zinger. You set up that, and here comes the volleyball spike. You're just more it kind of comes to you. So I would say, at the expense of someone who's combing through 200 hours of tape and cutting together a show for 6 months, because that's the hard part.
Yeah.
I think the real stuff is the organic stuff that just kind of comes tumbling out. And then from there, of course, you have to painstakingly make this story and make sure you're ethically balanced about how you shorten and condense and make it all work as a whatever package thing.
What about the technical crew, huh?
Let's also thank the technical crew and the staff, the union people.
The union people.
And Jonathan, you mentioned that people really remember that moment of you dropping the mic. Were there other moments from this episode that really stood out to people that you kind of hung on to, little details like that?
The driveway.
Which one?
The driveway when they pull out.
Yeah. I saw a hand back there.
Just go get food, because they have extra time. Is that
The Mexican making the U-turn?
Newspaper. The
Playground. Okay, so a lot of the stalling.
Yeah, they're all just sort of those moments were not important to the narrative, but they were just hijinks, and yeah, that's cool.
I thought the yogurt cup at the beginning. That was very.
What happened with the yogurt cup?
Just that you make fun of the way that he
when I was
licks
trying
the
to advocate
inside
for
of
him.
the yogurt cup.
What do you think about that?
It's awful. No, I mean, I think there's the kind of formalist structure to tell a story, which usually has to have a beginning, middle, and end. And then there's the stuff in between, which is little surprises that make you laugh or make you whatever, that I think make it a good story, because sort of any jerk off the street can tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. You want to have moments of real humanness and real, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think the hard part is how to glue those two things together and not step on the one when you make the other.
Jonathan, you asked if there were other Moby apologists. I'm curious how people felt about the Moby character, and him we can talk about as much as we want because he's not here. I was impressed. I thought he was not going to come off well. And I guess I am a Moby apologist.
Yeah, no. I think that he is able to speak from a place that not many people in the world can speak from.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was what made it kind of dark, was the unhappiness, even from this position of great wealth and success, to still feel that thing, it's like, it's very heavy. Do I sound like a Moby apologist?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would just note, when we say the Moby character, we are talking about the Moby character is Moby. I mean, in this game, we're talking about real people. So, like, I remember when he's there telling the sad story about his thing, and I was like, oh my God, like, stop a tape. We can't tell about, like, you're killing yourself. It's too intense, too heavy. And even afterwards, seeing, like, Twitter streams where people, I'd say evenly divided. Some people are like, I just went back and bought Play. I have a whole new respect or a new thing. Whereas some people are like, whatever, Moby should give you $1 million and whatever. And I think there are a lot of ways to hear that story.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe it starts out how you felt about it to begin with. But I think some people were much more sympathetic to it. But I do think Moby's extremely articulate and was willing to be super vulnerable and almost weirdly vulnerable considering the circumstance of the tape recorder in his face. And
yeah.
Like,
so in the moment, your feeling was, oh, shoot,
sweat
stop
on the back
doing
of my
this.
neck. I mean, it was very super awkward. Which is, I believe, noted by Johnny at the time, not usually a role that I'm in, of feeling like, clammy handshake. I mean, it was a very nervous-making moment to hear.
Which was very empowering for me.
It was just awkward as can be. It was awkward as hell. But it's just, I think sometimes those, like, real moments were a little uncomfortably too real. Because he could have been a glib, it could have gone a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, do you think he would have been different? I mean, at least for the listener, and maybe this is not how it really was in the moment, it felt like he didn't know that you were there to ask for the CDs. So it seemed like he maybe thought you were there to have an emotional conversation. And if he had known from the beginning that it was going to be about the CDs, he wouldn't have gone to such a deep place.
You don't think?
I don't know.
I don't know what did you tell him when? So there are certain things that were not 100% like we were in touch via email, which I think is said in the piece. But that day when he showed up, he was sort of like, I think he said something at the door like, hey, like, what do you want? What are you here for?
Yeah.
So
what are you doing here? Yeah.
It was not one of those things like, the Dr. Phil show where you're coming on to confront your cheating spouse. It was like, he was like, why are you here and what do you want? And why is this guy got a tape recorder and a mic out? So it was definitely a surprise to him.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole, it's like giving me flashbacks. That whole moment in that kitchen, that's why the lemonade was so important. He's getting all cotton-mouthed sitting there talking to him, being like, it was real, genuine human awkwardness.
Yeah.
I think it was out of respect for you that he went to that. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it comes across in the tape, but I remember thinking, like, there was a kinship between you two. Like, there was a similar way of talking that you both had,
Yeah, I mean, I think Moby, in addition to his career being a musician and all the things he accomplished, I think part of his rise was also fueled by the fact that he was a hyper-articulate guy who gave incredible interviews and, like, he could talk, like, and I think Johnny was putting me down recently saying I could talk in a way that was sort of an insult, where he's like, all you can do is talk.
That's
But the point being, Moby
know.
can talk, and I think that was a little bit, the moment was happening there where, we have a shared history and a whole background, but Moby's a very articulate guy and very sensitive guy, and also really earnest.
Yeah.
So I think that was sort of like this, it was almost like, what's that thing when you have, like the hot, moist air meets the cold air and you make a tornado moment, There was like sort of two
Just
similar
set
things.
you up again.
Yeah. I can't remember what that's
because I started off as a meteorologist on the Canadian Broadcasting
a
Corporation.
Venturi. The point being, there was this moment where we're coming into this kind of clashing but sort of synchronized kind of character types. So it was a complicated moment.
Did people listening feel uncomfortable? I mean, I was thinking when your wife made the Larry David comparison,
That
for
was
you.
not wrong of her. I'll have to
I
watch
feel deeply uncomfortable whenever I'm watching that show. I, for the most part, didn't feel that way listening to this episode. But how did other people feel while you were listening? Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of wondering why
You've got a
Moby
mic
or like
right
any
there.
of your guests are are so willing to reveal so much of themselves, knowing that they're being taped. And I think that moment felt really intimate, and I kind of crave those moments. But I'm wondering why people are willing to go so deeply, knowing that they're being recorded. I'm wondering about that.
Is that your gift?
Yeah, that's the Phil Donahue gift.
Yeah.
It is. It's also spending a lot of time. You know, it's edited down so it seems like it sort of naturally occurs pretty quickly, but
That's true.
it's a lot of time that builds to that moment.
Yeah, and I think also that probably being like not silences help. I mean, a lot of things that aren't like great socially can be good in an interview situation, and sometimes like the truth comes out in silences. Sometimes it's showing vulnerability yourself, you know.
I'll also note at that last Columbia thing, they played the intro where Jackie says, "I'm not going to talk to you," and hangs up on him. And a bunch of the people there were like, "Why would you prostrate yourself, and why would you start out your show by someone yelling at you and telling you shut up, go away?" I actually, in thinking about it, think that's also part of what gets people to open up. Is because he's not coming in puffed up. He's saying, he's allowing the space for them to do that because he's sort of ensmallifying himself rather than embiggening
Deflated.
himself. Yes.
Thank you.
Ensmallifying.
Yes, rather than
Thank you.
We got it.
Yeah, I felt like fiercely protective of Gregor. Like I would hurt Moby if he said anything that would any way harm my boy. So I was
And you're
very
not actually a relation, right?
No, I'm like sort of
More or
like
less.
best friend, sisters.
Oh,
best
okay.
friend, But like I was getting a massage while I was listening to the tape because I had to do it yesterday, and I was like getting tense as I was getting the massage because I'm like, I may have to kill someone based on the reaction. So it was like so humbling and so sweet the way it turned out, and I had this greater respect. Well, I mean, I already have infinite respect for Gregor, but I had even more respect after I listened to that.
So it was like
podcast.
new age music, panpipes, or like listening to the Heavyweight podcast.
Typically, I might be listening to like Diana Ross and Marvin Gaye, but instead, I think my masseuse from Nepal was a little concerned hearing this recording,
Yeah.
but she sort of went with it, and like I don't know. I mean, I was like worried and I was sad because I
Oh.
felt like I hope that he's not really harboring this resentment for so many years. But then, like, the way it turned out was so exactly how it should, because it was just representative of Gregor and who he is in the world, and that he was recognized for it.
That's the genius of Wendy Dorr.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, Wendy, speak to with Gregor's wife. And
Speak to my wife. Oh, wait, hold on. I'll call her.
No, well, we decided that we needed.
we test marketed it with some
we
demos.
test marketed. Well, we were kind of feeling like Gregor was coming off as too harsh, and not a real enough person. So we decided to talk to his wife, and that the wife made Gregor a normal person who's got this very eloquent wife who's
In real life, she did do that too.
yeah, and he has kids, and that
One
was
beautiful, one
that
not.
helps make us care about. He's spending a lot of time beating up Jonathan.
Although, also, just to note, part of what she was talking about was the previous, 10 years of the wiretap version of that. Because I think that show, from what I recall, the Moby thing, was all pretty real, and I'm a pretty sweet character in that. I think there were some wiretaps where we would intentionally set out that I'm calling up to kind of give him a harder time. So I think that may also have been legacy version of the character of me that she was referring to as the discomfort thing.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Like when we mentioned wiretap, some people have listened to it.
Any Canadians in the house? No. It was also on Public Radio International and Sirius FXM.
But was it interesting to hear, like, get to know Gregor as a real guy? Yeah.
It was
See, that's what I heard.
So you were a Wiretap listener?
Big time.
And so how did your view of Gregor change from this episode?
I just think in the end, sort of where he became real and he was like, Jonathan, you're missing the point. I didn't want the CDs back. It was almost like the characters flipped, because I think in Wiretap, he would have been the one, well, we didn't get the CDs, and sort of not take the lesson away, but instead he did take the lesson, the higher lesson.
And as someone who has listened to both of them for a long time, how do you feel about the green space stage version as compared to the radio version?
Now we're getting really
It's about what I expected, to be honest.
It's what?
It actually matches what I expected.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Question over here.
I'm not in charge. Sorry.
Basically the same thing, because in Wiretap, Gregor really came off as very prickly and caustic, versus in this one, I thought he was like really human, and whatever his sarcasm came off really good. So I liked him a lot here better. And
so
like,
Gregor, you should travel with Wendy.
Yeah. And well, even before the part about his wife and stuff, like the things he was saying and how like they felt like very sincere, whereas in Wiretap he was clearly a character, and here he was just like human. And like you were asking how he comes off right now, I thought like this is just him in the same episode basically, but like nicer, I guess, just a bit.
I'm not sure where to take that, but I would say, there was definitely, I mean, here's my version of events. I think it takes a certain courage to come across like an asshole to 1 million radio listeners a week, and to do that on purpose over and over. And we do, multiple takes where you do like, do another one where you're even meaner to me, and
this is Wiretap.
This is Wiretap.
Talking about.
And at the time, someone opened up a Twitter account with my face and my name, tweeting as me with a bunch of what they thought I would say, and a couple other doppelganger accounts. And like, it's a little like playing the heel in pro wrestling. Like I'm kind of being made into being this kind of more bombastic. I mean, it's a version of myself, but I'm not that bad. So I think Heavyweight, which is a much more, it's a longer form, kind of more carefully crafted thing. The whole episode is just this one segment. I think it worked out just to me fortuitously that it was like the redemption tour where I get to show my soft, wonderful, and gooey core. But that I think was just kind of a coincidence, because it was going from what I would say was a little shtick, playing this kind of thing, to a little real, a little too real.
But it also just so happened that you were in that mood when you came into the studio that day.
You know what the story is of that? Johnny gave me the wrong instructions to find the studio.
It wasn't my fault. There's another... we don't have time for that, but I gave you the right instructions.
Yeah. But you were genuinely feeling what you were feeling, and then we saw your real friendship there. That was kind of vulnerable.
Yeah, so as far as like art goes, that particular moment was like, I had like flown in on the red eye, worked all day, zigzagged all around Manhattan and Brooklyn, gone out. It had been a whole big ordeal to get there. And I was all spent, and it just was like this moment of very worn out, kind of vulnerable thing. As it happened, there was a tape recorder running, and that became the #1 download on iTunes for a month. So like that thing.
Which clip specifically came out of that moment?
It didn't wind up being the open of the piece, but it was the one where I was talking to him in the Gimlet studio, and I was like, 7 years of bad luck, Johnny, it's over for me. I'm dying here. And that was a moment where it just, like, if you recorded every moment.
You were processing middle age.
Yeah, it was just a little dark
moment. I caught
moment.
you right at the fulcrum of middle age.
That's why they call it lightning in a bottle, because it was just that moment. He happened to have the mic on. And then the piece got reconfigured around that. That was the first thing that was recorded in that whole Moby piece, which I think was even before we were necessarily doing a Moby piece. He just wanted me to do it, and it was just like this little, it wasn't that little a moment. We were talking probably for 45 minutes in this darkened studio. It was kind of late at night. My friend was actually waiting outside in a cab the whole time, true story, with his young daughter.
Who paid for that?
I did, as a matter of fact. But there was just a little bit of a moment of like, it was a dark little moment.
Yeah.
I think, those are the nuggets that make it sweet, because like, that was, again, not acting. That was just like my little moment of quiet desperation and scuttling along the floor. he
But
happened to be
so
recording.
you were there at the studio having this conversation, and you still didn't know that Moby was the hook for this episode?
I knew it. I didn't.
Johnny
maybe
knows
you
everything.
didn't.
Okay.
No, I think at the moment that we were talking about that, we were talking about something else, and it came around to that, and that, I think at that point, if I remember right, was that season 1, season 2, whatever, season 1. So I think he was just figuring out what it could be, and we were talking about what are moments, you know, like the sort of general theme of what Heavyweight's supposed to be, like things that have been disappointments in your life, and you know, it's like we're sort of just talking through this thing.
Right.
I think in that conversation, if I remember, this is whatever it was, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but throwing out some ideas and different things, and I'm like, you know, listing out all my resentments against various, you know, I had a whole laundry list. So that was just that moment. And then we picked up that thread. Also, I think you could speak to it better, Johnny, but the reason why it worked as a full story was there was an actual physical thing, that being a box set. Because it's hard to sort of concretize a missed life, wasted opportunity, you know, like bitterness, like unless you have like the chalice that is the thing, it becomes very abstract and just some dude grousing about nothing.
Right, but it's very satisfying to have that physical manifestation.
That
of it.
became the hero's quest.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I did get a friend listened and sent a Twitter fan sent a box set, the actual
Oh, that's nice.
whatever it was called. It's, songs of the South.
Yes, there's a question back there.
And wanting to, thank you all for being open and exposing yourselves so regularly, both in this show and Wiretap. And when I heard this was coming on, I went back to the old broadcasts, and there was one that, whether it's character Gregor or real Gregor or character based on himself, there was an episode where he tells you a story of seeing this little boy in a playground and telling him the truth of life. There's a great deal of lament, and I've clawed my way to the middle, and I, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter, real, not real. You enjoy the show and you listen to it and you care about this character and you wonder if it's true or not. But in any case, it was this episode for Heavyweight was just a really nice compliment to what felt like a very real conversation in Wiretap.
Yeah, do you remember that one?
Yeah, I think that was like one of the first
Yeah,
things.
it was, yeah.
Also, I mean, a lot of these conversations also are sort of like you're in like a fugue state when you're doing them, and I don't really remember them afterwards. And because I mostly read it on Twitter, people quote me back to myself on Twitter. So you know how people do that, like for YouTube, they're like just write a line from the movie as their comment. But that particular one, I think, was breaking character because it was all very sad. It was about like life is meaningless, like ball of nothing.
Something like that, yeah.
And I think it was less in the funny sting. It was a little more in the kind of sorrow thing.
Mm-hmm. Which can be funny. Yeah. Yes, it's coming.
Hi. I wanted to know if there were going to be possibly in later seasons characters from Wiretap coming back to Heavyweight, such as Howard Chakowitz, maybe.
Well, yeah.
Also, just on a side note, I love Wiretap and I love Heavyweight, and I started listening to Wiretap when I was 13, actually, and it was like huge for me.
Wow. So that must make you about 27?
No, 21.
What? Oh, I thought you started listening from the beginning.
When he started.
Oh.
When I started, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. What I was thinking there. I felt like a carnival guy. Like I was going to tell him, guess your age and your weight. Well, Howard was in one of the episodes, right? He was in the one about the friend who has to bury his dad's ashes on the golf course. He comes along to help. I do have some stuff, and of course my father and my mother are in some of them, and I don't know, Gregor will figure out something else to do, I think. I did have this idea with Howard, where he's been promising this cousin of his that he was going to come and Howard worked in a used bookstore for many years, so he was going to go to this aunt. He's been promising her for like many, many years already that he was going to go to her house and pack up all her books and tell her how much they're all worth so that they can sell them and everything. but I still can't get him to come to New York to do it. So I don't know, one of these days, maybe season 15 or something, it'll happen.
How do you feel about, I mean, in the transition to season 2, when you move beyond close friends and family and you're dealing with strangers?
Yeah, it was very scary because I felt safe to be a nudge and a nudnik, with people who knew me. It was very different. And also it felt like, maybe this is reductive, of the premise. Okay, yeah, literally the premise is I'm going to help people. But it changed the dynamic, because it was people in season 2, for the most part, who were writing in who wanted help. And they knew me already, and they were according me a greater respect, which made me very uncomfortable, because I do much better with disrespect and all that. So for people to actually be taking me seriously as a professional in some capacity changed the stakes. Made me more uncomfortable, which I guess made Alex Bloomberg happy. And it was, but yeah, I think it was very scary. It was very scary at first, but it seemed like it went okay.
I also think, not exactly, but mostly, I think you crossed the line into journalism in that now you're looking for stories, whereas before we could come up with stuff. Because a lot of those premises, we sit and say this could be a funny thing.
Yeah.
Now, that's not the way. This is more like, does anybody know about a story of disappointment, loss, and conflict that can be a story?
Right.
So, I mean, it's not 100% journalism, but it's more journalism.
Journalism-y.
Yeah.
And those stories would tend to be darker, just in general.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do tend to be darker, yeah. It's true. It's hard to find funny stories like that.
Yeah, life's not funny.
No, it isn't.
But we have a question right there.
So I guess I was wondering, how important is that sense of reconciliation to the story? So obviously there's real, there's not real. Maybe it being real, like every part of the story, it's edited down. That's not so important. But at the end of the day, how easy is it to make a story without real reconciliation?
Are you thinking of an episode in particular, or are you thinking of this
Gregor
one?
could be an example, but I think
Yeah.
every single story is about helping people and trying to bring people together and
Well,
get to an end.
Right. And I think, if there isn't reconciliation, then you have to work harder to make sense of it and unpack it and imbue it with some kind of idea or thought. It doesn't have to be an incredibly deep thought, but there has to be something there to make sense of it for people.
Well, I would say the Milt story held out that as a risk.
Yeah, we didn't know whether it would go well at all. And I mean, and some people listen and they're like, well, I don't get, Gregor didn't get his CDs back. You know what I mean? And I think they are missing the point. But some people are going to be literal about it.
Have there been episodes where you go pretty far down the path and then it just doesn't?
Yeah, I think some of them aired. I mean, there was one where I wanted if you've listened to the one about the discovered suitcase full of letters, where I wanted to get it back to the woman who had written all these letters 20 odd years earlier, and I was envisioning this great scene where she would open them and she would thank me and it would be wonderful, and she just didn't want them.
And then did you bolt on some ending that's like, sometimes when not getting what we want, it turns out we did get what we want?
Yeah, basically. Well, I had to incorporate the disappointment into it and then make it about some ideas.
Right.
And then we had a conversation at the end, the woman and myself, about why she didn't want it. And we got someplace, but it was a lot harder than if she had just taken the stupid suitcase and cried, But as a result, it was a deeper story. It was just a lot more difficult,
Yes, question back there.
I'm just curious about the reconciliation at the end. I mean, if you had set up that meeting and Moby said, "Oh, here's the box set," would that have been enough for you, or do you feel like it was more about having that conversation and having that acknowledgement?
For Jonathan in making the show, or for Gregor?
I guess for both. I'm curious about what you would have done and sort of on Gregor, how you would have felt.
I'll turn this over to you, but I do want to say, if we walked through the door and he saw Gregor and he was right away yes, hang on one second, stand right there, ran up to his attic, climbed up the little ladder, brought back the box set, and he said, "Here you go, pal," there would have been no story. So
would you have killed the episode? Or
there would have been a lot of
something?
song and dancing.
Yeah.
Well, we have done, I don't know how many that have gotten, I wouldn't say killed isn't the word, but they don't work out because after a while you're just like, there's no thread here. This is not gonna have a satisfying resolution.
Mm-hmm.
That happens. But I would say, yes, that would have been a sucky episode if he said, here's your box set next. Because what kind of story is that? Like,
it would have been like 10 minutes long.
But we would have spread it out.
Yeah.
It would have been a long, there would have been
There would
more
still
journey
be
getting
RuPaul
there.
to go to, yeah.
Another taco stand.
But to the question, is it ever enough? Do you ever feel like you become, do you deserve, obviously not. That's the whole point of like, what keeps you up at night grinding your guts out is that you always feel like you're never there. So that to me is more like the hungry ghost conversation, which is, if you're worried about how Mrs. Elvis's son Tomas became the president of Estonia and falling short of what Mrs. Elvis's kid did, who was my middle school librarian, like, these are abstract targets that you're setting for yourself. It's not like it really matters. I mean, I'm not insane. I recognize that, like, but at the same time, it's more just like, we're talking about feelings, not intellect here. You're talking about like, is there a guy sitting there on $1 billion who feels like he doesn't have enough? I think so, because I think I see them every day.
Right.
So like, what is the point where you get to that thing? It's not, and in fact, when I got that box set, I had to go out and buy a CD player. And I listened to it again, and I was like, that's pretty good, but like, then the next day came. It's not like this thing is not some magical thing that changes. In a story, it works better, when the lion got his heart back or whatever, and then he skips down the road.
But you did get your relationship back.
Yeah.
I did get a relationship back. So
Did he call? He said he would call you
guys
next
went
time.
for dinner, right?
We did go to dinner and had like the second most awkward conversation of my fucking life. Because I was sort of like, what do you think of this? Did you listen to it kind of conversation, that was a shame that I wasn't recording it. But he gave me a much more kind of surprising, and I would say generous read on it, where he's like, I think this whole thing is hilarious and whatever. Because I also think, in a way, it's sort of like the war is over when you're, he's not dead. He's like 50 years old or whatever. But like, I don't think he has these battles to quite fight anymore. So I think, in some ways, I think it's almost like clearing out the backlog of garbage from your life to have these little resolutions and stuff. And yeah, I mean, Moby and I and my brother we email each other probably 4 times a day, and it's not the trivial nonsense that Johnny reduced it to with his talk in that show. That was him taking poetic license. I mean, most
So
of
you
it.
did listen.
No. He told me that he was.
Okay.
He said to me something about weenus, and I was like, "What am I, a schoolgirl? I don't talk about weenus."
I just fact checked it with you. That's why I mentioned the weenus thing.
I'd never heard the word
as an
before.
example.
We mostly talk about more substantive things like the state of America, politics, and the world. So like.
Excuse me.
I hate to burst your bubble, but I'm just telling you.
No, you don't.
The point being, we have a relationship. I mean, we're not, kids anymore. We're not having the same thing, but like, I talk to him. I mean, that dinner I think was maybe like a settling of scores kind of dinner. And what's sort of weird about the dinner is 2 or 3 people came up for autographs during it, to him, not to me. But they were all like, "Oh my God, excuse me, are you the vegan chef?" Or no, he owns a vegan restaurant, and these were vegans who wanted his vegan thing. So it's just kind of a funny moment that his fame has kind of shifted or eclipsed his music thing to the world of food. And these were people who wanted his vegan advice and whatever. And I was like, "Do you get this a lot?" And he's like, "All the time. Like, it's like a god to the vegans."
Interesting. Yes.
I was sort of worried during the production of the show that Moby would be upset because I was thinking his ego might be injured about acknowledging where his big record came from, and so during the production of it I was nervous that he was going to get mad, but he seemed to be. He surprised me, and also during early drafts that I heard of the show where Greg was like, I don't really like his music or his whatever. It was kind of, so I was kind of sweading, thinking like, oh God, he's going to get.
Wait, who are you
This
and
is
why did
my
you
brother.
get
This is
to
Gregor's
listen to
brother.
it? Okay.
This is Dimitri. He's also in the part of the story.
okay,
You
great.
recognize the similar sound of our voices. We've shared genetic. But I would just to jump off a quick answer. Johnny can give a fuller one or Winnie, but we were sensitive to that. I mean, we're sensitive guys. We're super sensitive. So.
So sensitive.
So, I mean, not just like I wouldn't say like cover up a lie. I think there's a an ethical standard set by coming out of the school of This American Life and Ira Glass that makes you relentlessly always slavish to the truth and never fudge any facts. But, you know, because I'm not like, my ideas, I'm like, let's get a guy to play Moby. Who cares? No one will know. But these guys are all by the book all day long. But there is, you know, not just to not be a jerk, but also like sensitivity to as a person, as a friend. I'm not going to sit there and like make him look bad. So I do think that is more in the after the hours of tape get culled down. You have an opportunity when you're editing something to make them look like a braying jackass or to make them look like a hero. That's all in the edit. So a lot of that stuff was nuanced stuff about is it okay to say this or that, and is this mean? No.
Yeah. Is that something you were thinking about much, Wendy?
I mean, we wanted, I mean...
You were weighing, like, the funniness versus the niceness sometimes.
Yeah. What,
well, sometimes it would just be so funny, like, when you would tear him a new one, like, in terms of your, like, musical criticism. And also it just kind of felt, and maybe this was unfair, it was just sort of like, Moby will be okay. Like, he's not, I don't know. But did we, in the end, do you think it was fair? Did it still make you uncomfortable?
I never listened to the final one, but...
You see, it all runs in the family.
We're
busy people.
Yeah.
This is an example of a mother-child relationship. I heard that thing about Moby in the prior, not in the finished thing, and I said, don't do it. Don't do it, for God's sake.
And by the way...
Why?
I was so terrified that Moby would be shattered by this awful turn of events, and it would be terrible. And of course, he didn't listen. But
and for the record, Moby once drove over her foot, and God bless her, her foot is so strong. The car rolled over her foot, and she
Moby
was
did run over my mom's foot.
That was an early draft, by the way.
And you didn't think about confronting him on that? It was just about the CDs?
No, but just to be clear, and if, you know, the thing that we're talking about here...
While you were dancing, right?
No, she was waving goodbye in the driveway, and he was in the... he drove the car over her foot. But this lacerating moment is just one. I mean, I'll own up to it. I was like, I don't really listen to Moby's music, and I never really listened to it too much. It wasn't like I laid into him with like some personal invective that was incredibly harsh and like took him to town. It was just more me saying I don't really listen to his music. But you know, that obviously music is important to a guy who's a musician, and that was a moment that we talked about. That's mean to say.
You talked about that in the edits? Or?
There was a version of it he sent me to listen to. I played it for my mom, and she's like, I'm white with fright. I can't listen to this. It's terrible. You have to take it out. I'm shaking. And I was like, all right. I don't really have editorial control over the show, but...
I think we have time for one or two more questions. There's one right there, and then one back there.
Hi. First off, there's a guy here that looks like Moby that's been walking around.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if you've seen him. He has like a camera. Serious question, though. Okay, seems like a nice guy. How do you balance the authenticity with the anxiety and neuroses so well? Like, I feel like you're like, at the same time, like getting a group of people together that are like in on who you are and like who everybody else is. Like the part when like, I think it was Kalila had like the police hold for Jonathan Goldstein and like the call, or like the little things where you like invite people in, even when the episode with your mom, like you'll be having like specific jokes about like your style. I don't know how to describe it, but then also like being able to be weird at the same time. I don't know. I don't really have a specific question. I just want to know how you deal with neuroses and anxiety while being authentic. That's the question.
Well, are they authentic neuroses?
Yeah, but I think
that makes it easy, right?
Yeah, I don't think that they're a negotiation. I think they're the same often. It's just a matter of like managing them or negotiating them in the world in a way, you know? Yeah, I don't know.
I was just thinking, if you met Jonathan Goldstein in real life and he turned out to be Tom Hanks and was all like cheerful and happy and confident all the time, I mean, I think part of what you're asking
want
about...
your money back.
Yeah, exactly. You're asking as artifice, you're talking about a person who has these things in real life and just has the skill and the ability to turn them into comedy gold, but they're still him.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned the funny part a few times. Do you feel like do you want people to generally laugh in every episode?
Yeah. Comedy's really important.
Even in the episodes that are on the darker side.
Yeah, the best ones I think have both. And
Yeah.
I think the comedy can, if it's working properly, it will make you the darker stuff. You can go darker. You know what I mean? Is that like chiaroscuro? When like the play of light and dark makes the dark darker or something? I don't know.
I'll go with that. Yes, we got a yes.
Churrasco. Grilled meats from South America.
I saw a hand back there, but maybe not. Oh, one right there.
This is like a super practical question because I'm just sort of fascinated by podcasts. Like, can you talk at all like nuts and bolts? Like, how long does it take to make an episode? Like, how much journalism goes into it, and then how long does it take to edit it down? Like a little bit about the process. I'd be really curious about.
You guys practiced this uptown, right?
That's right.
With the journalism school.
No one had the guts to ask that question at J School. Thank you for that.
Someone's got to be bold.
Well, let's see. So it usually starts out with, it starts out with one interview or two interviews.
It starts off with a dream.
It starts off with a dream.
Continue.
A desperate dream for a story. And once that first interview is done, then we kind of think about, okay, here's the quest. We need to find out this thing. And it takes many, many, many months to first solve the thing, figure out what the answer is, and then write it and cut all the tape. So Jonathan worked on the Buzz and Sheldon episode for a year before I heard it. And then it took us 9 months to make all of those episodes. And we're working on them all simultaneously. Yeah. And they go through many, many, many drafts.
Is it getting faster now that the show kind of knows what it is?
Kaylee, is it getting faster?
Can I tell the? Should I tell the Carl DeLembo story? This is an example of like where everything comes together and you're thinking, oh my God, this is great, and then it's a dead story. There was this woman who never met her. The only time she met her dad was when he was in a coffin.
He was dead?
He was dead. A good question, Inspector. She never heard a good word about him from her mom or from anybody, but she remembered at this funeral when she was like 14 years old, there was one man who was weeping inconsolably over the coffin, and all she remembered about this guy was that he was missing a finger on his left hand. And she just wanted to speak to this guy to find out why he was crying, what she could learn about her dad, that she could tell her kids, because now they're of an age where they want to know about their grandfather, and she just couldn't find a nice thing to say about this guy. So we thought, well, how in the world are we going to find this guy? And then, Kaylee, you got a hold of the funeral, the guest list, the guest book, and started Googling and like researching and looking up, however you could, all the different names, and then you put into a database one of the names, and it popped up. The only document was the wrongful loss of a finger. And we thought, this is incredible. Like, we got this guy, and his name was Carl, let's just say. And every time I would call Carl, he would just hang up on me and didn't want to talk. And I felt like, this is insane. Like, we're here, you know what I mean? It's like we're on the sports analogy, the final yard of the touchdown or something, you know, and we just have to walk the football across to do the dance like a few inches, and he was would just tell me to F off and didn't want to talk.
Did she call also?
I got her to call with me. I thought maybe if she was on the phone, he would have a heart, wouldn't do it, and that was it. Story was dead.
But didn't he also threaten to kill you if
he
you
did
called
threaten
him
to kill
again?
But yeah, so you just don't know. You're just hoping because it's real, and you don't know what the end's going to be.
But I will say that's also the answer when people said to me, a lot of them heard it and they're like, hey, that was funny, do another one. Like, these things are not just pulled out of thin air. It's like 18 months later, we have episode 2.
Yeah.
Well, and hopefully any given person doesn't have so many deep regrets that
I
they
got plenty
need
of
to
regrets.
confront.
That's
Maybe
not
you've
the
got
problem.
enough.
The problem is turning them into good stories and getting participation. And
Yeah.
making it good.
Well, so I want to make sure that everyone has time to go to the bar and have yourself a Brian Lair that we were
It's a Brian Lair.
discussing. Yeah.
That's what this is all about.
We wish there was a Jonathan Goldstein to be drunk.
Maybe
It's-
one day.
Yeah.
It really is the final
There is a
humiliation.
Jonathan Goldstein to be drunk, that's for sure.
Why don't you tell the story?
He is.
It's very in character that you would come to your event and it would be a Brian Lair cocktail.
I was thinking like even a mason jar full of like liquid heat or Sterno or something.
That would be the Jonathan Goldstein.
Yeah, like a paper bag with a beer can in
Or
it
just
that's half empty.
Pepto-Bismol in a jelly jar.
Some Robitussin.
Do you want to tell them why it's Brian Lair?
Sorry?
You want to explain why it's Brian Lair? Because there is a reason.
I don't know it.
And Brian Lair is not associated with Heavyweight or Jonathan in any way, but he's associated with WNYC, and I believe it's named by the month, I was told.
Oh, yeah.
So
I thought I was
it's the
worried about where you were
monthly
going.
It's nothing bad to say
Yeah.
about Brian Lair. Wonderful guy. I'm just saying the Brian Lair cocktail is not a poor reflection on Jonathan. It's a positive thing on Brian Lair.
Yes. No, of course.
I don't.
But before we hit the bar, there was a confession corner out there that hopefully many of you participated in, and the question was, what is one accomplishment for which you feel you never got your due? And so now we get to hear from some of you.
It was always sort of my goal that I would go to Cornell, and unfortunately that wasn't in the cards for me. What I ended up doing was going to Clark University, and now I've been practicing labor and employment law for the last 30 years, and I am surrounded by people who went to Cornell. I feel like in the end, I'm exactly where I should be. So I did accomplish what I wanted, even though I didn't go to Cornell.
I went online on YouTube and I learned how to fix my own disposal, and I fixed the disposal and no one ever noticed. But I saved us a lot of money.
I had the idea for an invention for a toothbrush that was electric. I told my son, and he said, oh, forget it. The dentist said, no, you could never get anybody to put an electric toothbrush in their mouth. They'd be afraid of being electrocuted.
I feel I never get my due for showing up for work on time and not leaving before 5.
I've worked in New York City for many years doing ghostwriting, getting pieces that I've either written 60, 70, 80, 90% of, published in major outlets, and never having my name attached to them.
I got into a very vicious fight with my sister. I was trying to de-escalate the fight. My family never acknowledged that.
I asked for a raise this morning and I didn't get it.
When I was 5 years old, I won a beauty pageant. I feel like that was my peak of my life. Right now, most people would say that I have a face made for radio.
Thank you, guys. Well, thank you all for joining us
Thank
here.
you.
And thank you guys for coming and for doing your homework and being so fun.
What about the affiliated broadcast